Okay, here we go. Microphone here. Hi, Team Healthy. Hey, I'm so pleased to be with you today. We have actually a beautiful day going here in Central Texas. Normally, mid to late July, we're sizzling hot, but it's actually just warm. It's not cool, but it's warm. And for July, we're just thrilled. So we're having a good day. I hope you're having a good day where you are. Um, we have an interesting set of questions here today, and we always do. Some of you have not been a part of the live feed before. Maybe you've not done it much, but I really like the sense of community that we have here. What I ask that you do is go ahead and put questions underneath the comment section, and then I'll pick them up, and it allows me to know who you are and how you think and what kind of issues you're dealing with. I actually get video ideas from some of the comments that I receive, and then obviously what we're going to do today is I'm going to take some of the questions that you've sent in, and I'm going to be responding to them. That's what we do here on the live feed. And I know most of you are watching this tape delayed, and just know that wherever you are, we're worldwide. I consider it a privilege to be on the journey with you. And I like the fact that you're supportive of one another as you're on the path there together. We're a team. And we stand for DRC, dignity, respect, and civility, and that's what we want to push. Now, one of the things I'm going to focus on here today, based on the questions that have come in, is it's going to be necessary for us to see that narcissists process life differently. One of the biggest problems that I hear from individuals who are trying to make sense of that narcissistic person in their life is what's going on with them? How in the world can they possibly think that it's a good idea to fill in the blank? And part of the problem when you ask those kind of questions is you're thinking too much like a normal person. And you're presuming that that other person can share normalcy with you, and therein lies the problem. Narcissism itself is a character disorder, and it comes from multiple dimensions. Part of it is something that some people are just more wired towards their own high control and dominance and selfishness from the beginning. In other words, there's an inherited element. In fact, roughly, it can be as much as 50 or 60% of your personality. It can be that strong. Other times, it's a learned kind of pattern because of various experiences that we've had through life, and it can culminate in people responding in ways that they don't really need to, but they do anyway. And so it leaves you feeling perplexed. What's going on with them? I'm over here trying to have a reasonable pattern of life. Why can't you join me? So, with no further comments on that, I want to just kind of dive right into some of the questions that you've sent in and see what you have on your mind, and we'll see if we can make some responses to that. The first question is simply this: you have said that narcissism is the absence of love, and yes, I have said that. How did they get to the point of seeing love and especially kindness as a weakness? Okay, first, let me explain that part. That narcissism is the absence of love. Think about the characteristics that we identify as being part of the narcissistic spectrum, and it is a pattern on a spectrum. When we talk about narcissism, we're talking about somebody who's just operates with raw selfishness leading the way. Now, we all have some moments of selfishness, but theirs has just taken over. It also implies that there's a very strong need to control other individuals. All right, pause right there. We each can have our moments where we can be a little bit too overbearing or too opinionated or stubborn. But narcissists, it's just central to what they are. In addition, they can be manipulative, they can be exploitive. They don't particularly care about knowing and understanding you from your perspective. We refer to that as their low empathy. They operate with a false front, the false self, which sets up them living with alternative reality. They just make up stuff as they go along to suit their narrative. They can have a false sense of superiority. All of that's part of the narcissistic pattern, and it has many different fingers and extensions from that lead to problems like anger and defensiveness, etc. So when you look at those characteristics, you think, now, which one of those things that I just mentioned is consistent with a pattern of love? And the answer is none of them. Loving individuals think, well, what I know that I like to be cared for. And I know that I like to have people show goodness and kindness towards me. That makes sense. Therefore, why don't I go ahead and do that to someone else? But and here's where it runs counter to narcissism. To be loving and to be kind requires at least a couple of very primary ingredients. One is vulnerability. Narcissists have learned vulnerability is not something I'm doing because if I let my guard down and I allow myself to engage with people in a caring kind of way, I can be hurt. And it implies because I've already been hurt, life has proven to be difficult, and I don't want to set myself up for that. Now, they want love, but their version of love is not the same as what you and I might think of. They want undying admiration. They want to have the seat of privilege, and they want you to admire them. But that's not the same thing as love. A second primary characteristic that's necessary for love and kindness is you have a sense of humility. You lay down your need to be in control. You lay down your self importance and you completely tune into that other person in front of you. One of the most beautiful aspects of true love is what I refer to as your immersion. You lay down your self absorption and you allow yourself to enter into the mind and the spirit and the well being of another individual, thinking, I'd like to be a positive presence in your life. That's not a narcissistic way of thinking, and so they narcissists will hold on to their patterns because they think, yeah, but if I do that, I'm setting myself up to be clobbered. And what they forget, and what you and I need to remember, is that love and kindness doesn't mean that you can't have firmness. You can still have firmness. You can still have boundaries. You can still have a sense of initiative about your best ingredients. And if somebody comes against you in a harsh kind of way, you can take care of yourself. But narcissists are so all or nothing, black and white in their thinking, that it's like it's either you're loving or you're going to be messed around. I could say it a little bit more graphically, but you understand what I mean. And so they don't consider nuance. So basically, their fear of vulnerability and their memories of feeling hurt and feeling afraid and not wanting to be in that position where they could be stomped on supersedes, or it overrides their desire to say, I want to really know what loving and kind initiative would be like. I want to commit myself to that way. Their fear is too strong. Now, this next one goes straight into the topic we're talking about, how narcissists will process life differently from you. This person says, there were red flags at the beginning of my experience with my now narcissistic ex. I ignored them all. Is this normal? So this person's looking back thinking, I had a situation where I allowed myself to get involved with somebody. And yeah, I could tell that there were some selfish ingredients, or I could tell sometimes they could be too stubborn, or maybe their anger was a little bit outlandish. And I'm thinking, where's that coming from? But and those would be the red flags. But I was in love and I was hopeful and I was, I had some good plans in mind. So I was willing to overlook that. Am I a weirdo for having allowed that to happen? And the biggest problem you have is that so many people, and I include myself, by the way, going back into my teens and 20s, I didn't really understand narcissism. I knew selfishness was there, but you don't really think about it as much. Even if you've been exposed to it, it's not like, I was a psychology major, and so I like to think things through. But sometimes you don't really dig into some of the more pathological aspects of life until it hits you. And so this person who's asking the question, am I wrong, or is there something strange about me? The answer is no. Many times you may have heard it said, we can say that pain is a teacher. And sometimes you have to go through pain before you really understand and know life's lessons well. And that's so important for where you are right now. I'm going to guess that the vast majority of people who are tuning in to me and to people like me on the internet are here because of pain. It's like, yeah, it hurts. I didn't think it'd be this bad. I could see that some people may be outrageous, but I didn't really think that some folks who at least seem normal on the outside would be this demented once I found out who they were, or depraved. But they turned out to be more severe than what I thought. And so, you were wishing for normalcy and you tried to maintain the goodness that was there. And it feels, and in fact, if you saw some of those red flags, it almost feels like you're being a little bit too cynical when you say, hey, this is not good. Now that you can see that narcissists, part of their pattern is they're skilled at mimicking good things, and then it's only later that it can show up. Usually, now you can realize, well, I need to go real slow, and B, I do need to listen to those, or pay attention to those red flags. If for a good example, this is years ago. My wife and I were at a dinner at a restaurant, and the wife of we were with another couple, and the wife of the other couple had always been really nice and friendly, but wow, she was as rude as she could possibly be to the waitress that we had. And I made note of that. And then I began picking up on the way that she talked to other individuals, or there were critical remarks. And there could still be times when she'd be helpful and friendly and, bring cookies, etc. But over time, I began realizing there's more going on there than what she allows for people to see on the surface. And eventually that guy's relationship with her fell apart. And I realized, yeah, the flags were there. And so when you begin seeing that, I'm hoping, without turning into a harsh, critic, but you can just read the red flags, thinking, okay, note to self, that's something I need to factor in as I engage with people, and listen to what your gut is trying to tell you, because it's there. You're not abnormal for having had that experience, but I'm hoping that once you have had the experience, it can give you wisdom, and you can be a little bit more patient, and you can be, frankly, a little bit more discerning and willing to kind of hold your ground when you do see those red flags in the future. Another, and this is an interesting question. Can you talk about the grief that is part of your response to a narcissist? Okay, so here we're going to take these other questions about how narcissists can't show kindness, and then they have red flags, and then you get to the place where you're experiencing grief. What's that all about? Well, keep in mind that grief is the emotion of loss. And when we enter into relationships, we enter into it, ideally anyway, with positive intentions. I want this to be my safe place. I want this to be somebody that we can share personal kinds of thoughts and feelings and ideas and dreams with. I want this to be a place where I feel known and that other individual feels known, and you have real high hopes, only to find out that the narcissist, who may have matched pitch with you for a while, more or less decided after time was going on, I can't keep this up. This is too hard for me. And then that selfish, that controlling, that overbearing pattern began to show itself more and more. And then it leaves you thinking, oh, I'm so disappointed. And then maybe there's a no contact now, or the relationship has fallen apart. There's a disparity between you and that person that's not going to be bridged. And so, what do you do? Keep in mind that when we talk about grief, you've heard the stages of grief. You can have denial, you can have anger, you can have some bargaining. And when we say bargaining, it's like you go back and think, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. You can have depression, and then ultimately you wind up having acceptance. And then along with those are the 5 stages of grief. And along with the grief, you can go into withdrawal. You can even be depressed, or you can have a feeling of emptiness. You can have a real big, huge question mark about what's next. So grief is a very complex emotion, and it requires patience on your behalf. Now, keep in mind, narcissists tend not to have strong grief. They'll have regret, but it's a regret that's outwardly based. Yeah, I regret that you were such an idiot. I regret that you did me dirty. And so they go into blame shifting, which really isn't grief at all. It's just bitterness that they hold on to. make sure your grief is it allow you, and part of grief is anger. You allow yourself to have the anger, but not so much of an anger where it turns into hatred. And I recently did a video on cynicism. You don't want to get to the point where cynicism becomes such a deep part of who you are. Skepticism, yes, that means you're weighing things out objectively. Cynicism, you just have a very negative and harsh kind of attitude that goes along with that. And so allow yourself to grieve and to feel sad. And if you have the need, you can talk it out with a trusted friend or a therapist, or there are support groups out there related to that. But it's normal, and it's actually good for you to go through that, because when you allow yourself to grieve fully, ideally, it will take you into more of a personal reflections kind of a way. What does this mean, and what am I learning about people, myself, what I can and cannot expect out of life, what went right, what went wrong, where am I going to apply my lessons in the future? So grief can have all of these components, but I'm hoping it can also give you an impetus to say, I'm going to learn from this. And that's what we're all about here on our channel. So give yourself permission to go there, and don't feel like you have to be on a real tight deadline. I mean, you don't want to grieve for 20 years straight. I mean, sometimes you can have what we call anniversary depression, when there's been some sort of bad event, and a year later, or even 5 years later, oh yeah, I remember that. So it can be something that can stay in there, but you'll eventually be able to get through it. Okay, this next one. And by the way, this next question identified herself as being from Tasmania. So that tells you where we are worldwide. I mean, literally on the other end of the world from where I live, anyway. She thinks I'm on the other end of the world. This person says, my question is, how do you handle family and relatives that are generational narcissists? I'm the scapegoat truth teller who walked away from physical abuse from my mother in my 40s. My adult children have been exposed to strong narcissism from both sides, as I married a narcissist. That's not uncommon. I want to continue to nurture and support my son and daughter, and they've picked up some narcissistic fleas. You ever heard of that? You can't lie with dogs without having fleas, is the old saying. And I think that's a great question. So here's a woman who says, I grew up in a narcissistic home, and it was bad enough to where I just had, in my 40s, I had to just say, I've got to pull back. This is not good for me. It's ruining my mental health, and I need to practice some self-care. The problem is that she had associated with another narcissist and had kids with that person. And so, which is not at all uncommon, because we tend to fall back on what's familiar to us, particularly in those early years when we don't know what we don't know. And so now she has adult children. And so they can be picking up, when she said narcissistic fleas, they can be picking up on some of those same characteristics. Again, that's normal. It's kind of like, well, the best way to learn anything is through modeling. And if that was your model, then yeah, you kind of pick up on that. Now, to this person's credit, she's decided, I'm going into a different path. And then the challenge she has is, how might I be able to do that with my son and daughter and help them get on that growing path with me, without making it seem like I'm undermining their relationship with people that they're attached to, or that, without making it seem like I'm being too critical. Well, there's one word that you want to be very careful to not overemphasize. Now, you're going to say this, but it's the word you. If you go into conversations with that adult son and daughter with an accusatory mindset, it's not going to go well. For example, you can say, do you understand? You sound just like your dad. Or, my mother used to talk to me like that, and you're not going to keep doing that to me. You can do that, and it immediately puts them on the defense. Instead, talk about where you are and talk about what your process has been. And you can let it be known. I know that we're all, you and me, your sister and I and you, we're all in this together. And each one of us has our moments where we're trying to figure out what to do with our family system. And you know that I've had times when I've just had to pull way back and just remove myself from the influence of people that didn't bring out the best in me. One of the things that I'm wanting to emphasize, and when I'm with you, I want this to be central to our relationship. I want to emphasize things like, healthy conflict resolution. Or I want to emphasize showing respect and listening to one another, even when we don't really agree, or maybe especially when we don't agree. That's my goal. Or I want to emphasize just having my own steadiness emotionally, because I know I have a history where I've been disjointed emotionally, and I don't want it to continue. I'd like for you to join me in that. And I'd like for that to be something that we could prioritize, the three of us, so that we can make some differences and take our family tree into a different kind of way. Now, I don't know, obviously, because I don't know your situation. I don't know how they'll respond to that. They may instantly say, "Oh, Mom, we've been waiting for somebody to say this to us," or it may have been something like, "Oh, Mom, you think too much." I don't know, but get it out there and let it be known I'm making some adjustments. Now, I'm going to guess that your kids are in their 20s or 30s, and it may be that they're not at a place of readiness. It may be that they are, but it may be, let's say, 10 years from now. They're exhibiting some of the negative characteristics that you're talking about today, and it may hit them. This is what my mother was telling me about. And it may be that they're at a readiness place at a time that's maybe a little further down the road than you wish, but go ahead and say it. And then let your life illustrate. Things are very different here with me. And from time to time, when they go into, let's say, a pouting or a controlling or a stubborn or an argumentative kind of thing, you might just go ahead and reiterate. I know that it's difficult to get rid of old habits. And sometimes I want to jump in there with you and match pitch with that. I know that you're frustrated. Just know that I'm going to do my best to continue on and not get sucked into that kind of stuff. And if you would, I'd like for you to work with me. Put it on that kind of a level, and then there's more of a join me kind of a mentality that you exude, as opposed to you'd better kind of mentality. And see if that kind of mindset can work. Okay. So, and then just one more thing, as you're talking and you kind of sense that they are somewhat interested in making some adjustments, it's okay from time to time if they say, "Well, such and such happened, and I was just so mad." It's like, well, let's break that down, and you can kind of take. That's what I do as a therapist, and you can take that kind of approach. Okay. All right. Now, this next person asked the question, why is the narcissist so eager to take revenge in very sneaky ways, even after years of seemingly nice contact? Okay, so you have a person who says, I've been hanging around with this person that has a reputation of being kind of nice. And yet, if I disagree, then sometimes revenge is there. And I don't know exactly what form of revenge, whether it's, I kind of get the sense that the question here is more of a social nature, somebody that you knew, but, it may be that they suddenly withdraw and go crickets and you don't hear from them. Or it may be that you find out that they have said something really ugly about you behind your back. Or it may be that you're wanting some sort of cooperation and it's like, there's no way, I'm not going to do that right now. And they become stubborn. Why do they do that? Especially when they've had a history of being very nice. Let's keep in mind that part of the ingredients of narcissism is the need for control. And it's in moments of conflict that you're going to see a person's character come through. And so narcissists can think, well, when I'm nice and things are going pretty good for me, then I feel in control. But something can happen that can make them think, hey, wait a minute, I'm losing that. And so their vengeful responses are their way of trying to form or find a sense of control over you. Keep in mind, control isn't always illustrated through bossy and mean kind of behavior. Sometimes people control with niceness and friendliness. And as long as they can be, hey, old buddy, old pal, then they feel like they're getting their way. That's what they do. So even those nice characteristics, unfortunately, can eventually start feeling suspect to you. And just know that's part of the pattern. And narcissists can be chameleons and they can kind of flow with whatever's in front of them. And as long as they feel like they're getting what they want, they're okay. And so the friendly and the pleasant stuff can be part of their way of saying, if I do this and if you coordinate with me, it's working. I'll just keep doing that. But then if something else comes along and they feel like you're not hearing them, boom, here comes the hammer. And that's how it works. Um, and so it illustrates that control and selfishness can show up even in friendly ways. That's what we refer to when we talk about the covert narcissist. They seem on the surface to be okay, but beneath the surface, there can be some subversive reasonings for why they do what they do. And I know that sounds a bit cynical, but that's the way it works, and that's how they often will operate. So there you go. Okay, this next one. This person actually begins the question by saying, here's an entertaining question about narcissists. Have any of you ever heard your narcissist speak in their power voice? Okay, I'm looking at the comment section. Anybody ever heard their narcissist speak in that power voice? It's like, oh man, alive, are you kidding? Yes. I remember so well. I was at a conference with a colleague of mine who's in my profession, and this was a couple of decades or more ago. And this guy was pleasant and friendly and all like that, but he had one of his teenage kids with him, and the teenager said something that bothered my friend, the dad, and he came on with a tone of voice that I had never heard before, and it was like, "Let me tell you something." He just went in that real deep, stern tone of voice. And it's like, huh, interesting. And he didn't apologize. He didn't come back and say, hey, look, the kid got to me and got under my skin. I apologize. It was just like, no, this is natural. And I could kind of tell that the son knew, all right, this is the way my dad gets it. And I learned something. Unfortunately, it wasn't flattering. And it's like, yeah, sometimes that stern, that controlling person is there. And as again, we go back to control. They can appear okay on the outside, but behind the scenes, they're processing life with that control dimension. Now, I don't know what the history was for that boy. If he was an oppositional, defiant kid from the very get go, I don't know, or if he had conflicts with mother or other kids or something like that, and it showed up with dad. But the dad really was exasperated, and given the fact that I had known this man for a while, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But it'd be that would present a time when you use that harsh, stern tone of voice, that narcissistic control. It'd be a time of thinking, why do I do that? Why did I choose that manner of responding to my child instead of something else? So yeah, they can go into that power voice. It's kind of like, I'll show you. And keep in mind that you really do see a person's proclivity toward narcissism when there's some form of conflict there. That's when it shows up most. So an interesting kind of thing. And so yes, that power voice exists and it's real. And just in the case of a friend or a family member who goes into that space after they've kind of settled down, it's legitimate to say, you were thinking a little bit differently than what I had expected. What was that all about? And see where they'll go with it. Because I've got some friends I can talk that way with, and they can talk that way with me too. Now, this is a tough one. This next one. This person says, when my adult daughter was young, she would complain constantly about how controlling and mean her mother was. She often said to me, Dad, you know how impossible mom is. Now she's a carbon copy of her mother. I don't understand how she could swing from being repulsed by her to becoming just like her. Okay, that's a tough one. So here we have a dad who's looking back with his daughter, remembering, let's say 20 years ago when she was a teenager, she would come to me and say, Dad, I don't know what to do with mom. She's so overbearing. Or they might be in the kitchen and she had an episode where mom was just being, overboard with anger. And maybe the kid was crying. I don't know. And it's like, yeah, you can tell that really has gotten to the child. And the hope is that you can sit down and say, well, why don't we talk? Now, I don't know where this dad was, obviously, with respect to his communication style with the daughter. Was he the kind of dad that would say, well, let's sit at the kitchen table and let's just talk? Tell me what you feel and let's talk about what you do and don't like about this situation, what your options are. Some kids will pick up on that and they'll take to it real well. Others is like, don't bother me right now, I'm too busy being angry, I don't know what the situation was. But let's keep in mind, the number one way that children learn anything is through modeling. And so here, this young lady now, when she was in her formative years, that was her model. And it's interesting, especially it's the same gender parent, and so that's not at all unusual that she would model a little bit more after that. And then here she comes, and rather than thinking, well, I'm going to do something very different from what my mother did. It's like, well, I guess that's just what you do. And so when she became an adult, she did what she saw. And it's sad to say that some people, even when they've been on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse or harshness, rather than thinking, I can do better, it's like, okay, one of these days it's going to be my turn. And so they go about and they give their garbage to someone else. It's called displacement, or they may, just unload it elsewhere, as opposed to thinking, I know how frustrated that made me feel. There's no way in the world that I would want to do the same to someone else. Now, apparently, in this case, it didn't happen. The modeling was so strong, and who knows? The daughter just decided, if you can't beat them, join them. Or it may be that there was some genetic component, because there is some of that's there in terms of the capacity for insight, etc. But here, this father is. I would suggest to him that he could at least make an attempt to say, to the daughter, I know that I remember how you really didn't like it when you were yelled at, and let's think about that whole concept, because I know that sometimes you get frustrated, and again, going back to what I said about that other question, I'm trying to be a bit of a different kind of a person, and I'd like for you to join me in that. Maybe she'll be able to join you, maybe not. But how can she be repulsed and yet be just like the mother? It's modeling, and modeling with an absence of reflective thinking that would take her into a different direction. It's sad, isn't it? By the way, just as an aside, you may have heard me say this before, but I really do think that psychological insight and reflective, analytical thinking is a skill that some people just have naturally, just kind of like some people are naturally musical. And then some people just don't have it, just like some people don't have the musical gift. And it's one of those kind of traits that I ponder. It's like, when I'd be in my therapy office, there'd be some people that would come into my office and they'd make me look like a genius, because I might say something that had an insight attached to it. And that person would take it and be like, wow, that makes sense. And they'd just run with it and deepen the thoughts that would go along with it. And it'd be like, oh, this is why I do the work that I do. And then other people would come in and I would say something that had an insight attached to it. And it'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, let me tell you some of that stuff I don't like. And they would just bypass it. And it's like, no matter how many times I take them back into that insightful thinking, it's like, no, I don't go into that space. I'm just here to complain. And so, some people have the skill and some people don't. And so in this father's case, apparently his wife, I don't know if it's his ex or not, and also his daughter apparently don't have a whole lot of that skill. All right. This next one is a similar one. This person says, the narcissist in my life is my adult son. He has substance abuse issues along with extreme anger. I've always expected him to be accountable for his actions, but he seems incapable. Should we treat this as a mental illness that can't be helped? But then that would basically let him off the hook for his despicable behavior. Um, Narcissism is it's a character disorder. There's something, let's say you have a heart condition and it's congenital. Well, a part of narcissism, in most cases, there's a congenital element there. In other words, they just kind of have a proclivity in that direction. Um, and so, yeah, you can make a case that says, well, it's a psychological disorder, it's a mental disorder. But unlike heart disease, narcissism, you still have different kinds of choices you can go into. You can still decide, well, I know that I can scream when I'm angry, or I can state what I need to state and stay respectful. I have options. Narcissists, it's like, I don't do that. And so, when she says, well, I can have compassion, which I appreciate, a parent having that kind of feeling. But, if I set consequences, it's just my way of saying, well, maybe I'm being too hard on him. But no, you still need to choose, set consequences. And consequences implies I'm going to let you choose. You can choose being inappropriate. And if so, you have this consequence waiting for you. You can choose to be coordinated, and we'll have this waiting for you. I'll let you decide. So, I do think that choices are in play, and you're not being mean or insensitive. Even though he may have had a proclivity towards this that he didn't ask for, the bottom line is you're not doing him any favors by saying, sure, go ahead and be mean and selfish towards me. I'll let you get away with it. And so I've had so many conversations with parents of adult kids who have substance abuse or other kinds of issues where they more or less had to have that really, really hard discussion and say, since you've decided that you want to continue in your substance abuse and with all of the dysregulated emotion that goes with it, I'm going to let you know you can still do that. The consequence is you can't do that under my roof, or I'll not support you financially, or whatever it might be. So I'm going to let you decide. And I have known plenty of people who have had substance abuse issues, and they've decided, it's not worth it. And they go into treatment, or they go into AA or something like that, and they get their act together, at least related to that part. And so I believe that consequences and choices are your most loving thing that you can do, as long as you administrate it in ways that are or administrate it in ways that are decent and kind, and that your motives are very right. Okay. And again, we go back to our theme. They don't process like you, but the bottom line is you have to stay true to you. This person says, 2 years ago, I decided to draw a friendship to an end. She could be warm and fun to be around, but she had many other issues that made the relationship very unpleasant. She was prone to incessant talking, and she'd be offended by my boundaries. 2 times she threw a major temper tantrum like a child. She interrupted a lot when I'd try to speak. How is it possible that a person can be both appealing and repelling? Well, part of the pattern of narcissism is they can learn to become chameleons. If you're the kind of person that says what you see is what you get, it's kind of nice to think, well, surely that other person would do the same in reverse. And so they may be friendly and tell funny stories and be engaging and ask about, how did that go? That, what you talked to me about last week, how did that go? And they may ask follow-up questions, and you're thinking this is a good relationship. But then there can be other times when a whole host of other ingredients come through. It's like, this is just not workable. And then the fact that she could be, like you say, very unpleasant, incessant talking, offended by boundaries. In other words, I have to be in control. Temper tantrums like a child, interrupted. And the implication is I couldn't reason with her. And you have that side of narcissism. And that's when they just show their real colors. And, what you can't do is you can't afford to have binary thinking. Well, she's either going to be friendly or she's going to be not friendly. Which is it? And with narcissists, it's like, well, there's a whole lot of stuff in between. And, was that friendly part real? Oh, in the moment it may have felt that way, but if it was attached to so many other unhealthy ingredients, it's like, but I don't want to have to go with that pleasant stuff if the price to pay for it is going to be, being verbally pummeled or embarrassed or humiliated or chronically frustrated and have to deal with all of her shenanigans. And so there are times when the package can be such that you decide, I don't want to have to deal with all of that, and I don't have to. And if it's abusive enough or if it's difficult enough, then I'm willing to move away. There are times, and I can think of several in my life. Maybe some people think this way towards me. When you have somebody who's like, well, they're not all that perfect, but it's not like it's so bad that I can't deal with it. And so you just learn to roll with it. And there's some things it's like, well, I wish I'd do it differently. And so we all have those kind of moments. But when it's egregious and when it's too persistent and when it's exaggerated, that's when it's reasonable for you to say, I'm having to draw my ultimate boundary and I need to remove myself. That's very reasonable. And then the narcissist may come and say, well, then you're the problem. And then that shows, well, they don't think like me. And that's why we're just not a good match. Okay, now this next one, and I'm hoping you can pick up on the nuance on this one. This person says, Dr. C, is it possible for a person to be narcissistic toward one or two people, but not others? And my answer is yes, no. Hear me out on this one. This person goes on to say, my sister is loving toward her children and grandchildren, but has always abused me. I'm her younger sister by 9 years. She's also used my mother and milked her for every cent. My mother was scared of her. So the question is, well, she's narcissistic towards me. She's narcissistic towards others, but she's not narcissistic towards some people. Is that common? Now, the reason I say yes and no is yes, she can show her narcissism toward you and toward your mother in ways that she doesn't towards the other individuals. But that doesn't mean when she's kind towards other individuals that she's not being narcissistic. Keep in mind that narcissists, I go back to the word chameleon, they can kind of go underground. They can be stealth. It's like, yeah, I've got some other people, my kids, and I can control them differently than I can control my adult sister or my mother. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn them into mini me's if I can, or flying monkeys, and I'm going to teach them the ways. And as long as I'm getting what I want, so the narcissism is still in play, even as she may act more pleasant and friendly and giving and generous, etc. You just see it more. So it's there, they just don't see it as much. And so, even as she's showing some of the kindness, that can be part of the manipulation game. Because I can promise you, if one of those kids comes along and adult kids and says, "Mom, I sense some things going on here with you that are just not that doesn't feel right," I can promise you, she'll probably get mad at them, and particularly if it persists. And so the narcissism is still intact. It's intact in a different way, which is why we refer to narcissism as being either overt or covert. Sometimes you see it overtly, other times it's there but covertly. It's there, but it's not necessarily shown. It's being disguised. And so that's part of their deal. And so that's what distinguishes them in a different kind of way. So it's kind of interesting. They're narcissistic towards me, but they're not narcissistic towards others. I see what you mean, but they're to be narcissistic there, just of a different, more covert way. That's my take on it. All right, here one last question: is it common for narcissists to be unable to speculate? Time and time again, my narcissistic ex would respond to my speculations with maybe or perhaps, in other words, vagueness. And the answer is yeah. One of the things, I go back to the word vulnerability. Narcissists don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to expose who they are. And so when you say, "Hey, let's think. What do you think about this?" or "Have you come up with that?" they can give you this vague, I don't know kind of thing, which is their way of saying, if I really share what I really feel, I don't know if I'll sound stupid or if I'll expose myself or if I'll slip and not be as in control. So I'm not going to go into that space. I'm just going to give you some broad generalizations. And there can actually be a very subtle passive aggressive element to that kind of vague response. When I say passive aggressive, it's like there's a deliberate non cooperation. And by saying, yeah, maybe it's their way of saying, get off my back, will you? Now, they're not saying that out loud, but that's what they can be thinking. And when you look at it from that angle, it's like, yeah, they've got an agitation that's there. But instead of saying, I am now agitated at you and let me show you why, you're just going to kind of play it out by shrugging. It's like, who knows? Could be, maybe, perhaps. And it's their way of saying, if I give you that kind of response often enough, maybe you won't expect much personal dimension coming back from me, which is exactly what I want. Go away, you bug me. That's the passive aggressive. So yes, it's very much common with them, and it's just yet another offshoot of how narcissism can play out. And that's what makes this such a fascinating topic, because it can show up in such a wide array of behaviors. And so once you learn how to read it and see the ingredients behind it, you realize, man alive, what looks normal on the outside or looks harmless on the outside can actually have some nefarious schemes behind the scenes. And that's what I mean when I say they may appear normal, but they're not normal in the same way that you might want to be, because hopefully you and I can be authentic. What you see on the outside is pretty consistent with what I have on the inside. With narcissists, no way. That's not how it works. Okay, Team Healthy. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I appreciate you putting the questions. Go ahead and put them in the comment sections, and I will pick up on them. And we're going to pick up next time and see what we have. I hope you have a good rest of the week and enjoying your summertime. And I will see you same time, same station next week. Bye.